All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Debris Management Preparedness in Challenging Times workshop. I'm Erin Livingston, and I work with H-GAC, and we have a great workshop lined up for you this morning. Before we get started, I do want to go over a couple of general notes and logistics about the workshop. Well, my slides were advancing. There we go. Okay. So first up, this meeting is being recorded. Microphones will be muted and cameras will be turned off throughout the presentations. If you are on the phone and unmuted, please mute your phone now. We will have time for questions throughout the presentations. We're going to stop a few times for that, but just type your questions in the chat box at any time, and we will answer those at those designated times. You can access that by using the control bar on the bottom of your screen. You want to click the speaking bubble icon. If anyone is on a handheld device, you can access the chat by clicking on the three dots on the lower right side of your screen and choosing the chat in the menu. If you are just attending this workshop or this webinar via telephone only, you can still ask questions. You can do so by raising your hand. You press *9 to do that, and we'll call on you and we'll unmute you at the when we're ready for your question. With that out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and welcome John Burry and turn it over to him.
Hey, thank you so much, Erin. And thank you for all the participants who have decided to share their morning with us today. I'm going to go ahead and pull our slide deck up and begin sharing. I knew this would, here we go. Excellent. So welcome to the 2020, now 2021 webinar on disaster debris management in challenging times. Obviously, we are here today virtually, a little bit of a different way of executing one of these workshops. I've had the privilege of working with H-GAC for many years on disaster debris management. And each one of these workshops seem to have a different flavor or a different area of focus. And sometimes, for those of you who haven't attended the workshop before, always seem to have a nuance or a hiccup of some sort. And a funny story I'll share with you, because we have over 200 participants that have registered for this event. Which is record-breaking. We have 100 plus participants online now, so we want to thank everybody for joining us. And back in so again, a couple of days before the workshop, I start to get a little nervous. Having done these, for many years, you always get a little jitters, if you will, prior to the workshop. And in 2008. A few days before workshop on September 16th, I believe, in 2008, September 16th, we had Hurricane Ike that hit the region, and we had to cancel the workshop and postpone it to the next year. In 2016, we had a workshop on August 11th, and that was unique because in midway through the workshop, my wife went into labor, and I unexpectedly had to leave, and so that was a little bit of a curveball, if you will, and a life-changing event. And then for this last workshop in December 3rd of 2020, as we've prepared for it, I actually, I'll share this with the audience here. In preparation for our workshop on COVID on solid waste operations, I actually went down with the virus and had a pretty nasty bout with it for a couple weeks. And so thank you all for the reschedule and your attendance at this, because this is truly and I'm also very happy that nothing has gone wrong yet, knock on wood, with the workshop. And so we're very excited to have you all here. We've got some great speakers lined up. Before we get into the actual prepared remarks, what we had is we want to ask you some questions. So right now, Andrea, who is one of our moderators, is going to be asking 5 poll questions and very brief radio buttons. Some of them are single choice, some of them are multiple choice. Some of them are targeted at those representing the public sector, and some are for everyone. And so we're going to take a few minutes, and shouldn't be very long and not a heavy lift, but really gauge a little bit more about you and what your background is and how COVID has impacted your operation. So Andrea, if you want to go ahead and start putting that out there. So with the first question, for those participants in the public sector, please provide the type of department and or division you represent. Again, we have a few of those departments represented. And again, which one would most closely fit your organization? See the polling coming in. I feel like I need one of those big boards back there showing you all the poll results. But we have, this is a really handy tool. And so again, we always want to make these workshops very interactive with the audience. And this is one of the ways that we can actually tailor the messaging and more accurately direct our comments and some of our remarks to you. So with a few more in, we got about a minute there. A few more deciding. All right, we got a good sampling, 77%. Andrea, you want to go to the next one? All right, and for those participants in solid waste operations, for this question, please provide the top type of operation that most closely represents the area of operation that you represent. We have MSW collection, again, those folks out in the field, brush and bulky waste, those that are in the heavy trash or brush and bulky collection operation. For those of you on the disposal side, most closely focused on that, and recycling, finance, or in the financial aspect, or the administration. All right, poll results coming in. I like it. A lot of other, okay. All right, giving it about a minute here. All right, got a good sampling there. All right, Andrea, if we could go to the third question. All right, impacts of COVID-19. We've got 10 ways that, again, in discussing with folks over the last 9-10 months, some of the more popular or actually the more relevant ways that COVID-19 has impacted various organizations. We've got a few listed here. Number one, increasing in solid waste collection. Again, you can choose up to 3 of those. We want to gauge how COVID has impacted your organization. Again, this is for all participants, those in the public sector as well as the private sector. Staff call-out shortages, COVID-19 routing and operational adjustments, FMLA, long-term disability, even in some cases, the death of employees, homeless solid waste collection, those who've seen an uptick in that operation, budget shortfalls, obviously a huge point of discussion for many local governments or many organizations. Demands for hazard pay, something that nationally has been discussed, and we'll be getting into that. Availability or implementation of personal protective equipment, or more commonly known as PPE, whether that's plexiglass, face masks, glove sanitation, sanitizing different areas. Teleworking technology issues, whether that's implementing teleworking, doing HR via teleworking, management. A lot of folks are out there cancellation of programs or limitations in service. A lot of folks struggling with that due to various issues. And again, these are some of the areas that we'll be diving into throughout this workshop. All right, excellent. Next slide, please. Or sorry, next question. All right, COVID funding should be real easy for those participants who are attending, and it's relevant. Has your organization received funding for COVID-19 related? If you require multiple choices, you have that option, but we have first the Treasury Coronavirus Relief Fund. We have FEMA and their Public Assistance Program. We have CDC, Department of Health. We have other funding, and obviously there's a choice, which is no additional federal assistance. All right, the poll results coming in. Excellent. All right, we got about 63 poll results, a few more folks coming in. Outstanding. All right, Andrea, if we could go to our last poll question. All right, looking forward to 2021, 6 days in, or actually 7 now, for all participants as you look to 2021 and beyond. What is the most concerning trend or issue for your organization? Again, please choose one. This just kind of, we're all prognosticators here, all have different feelings and thoughts on how this virus will evolve in this pandemic. We have staff shortages, call-outs, continuing to deal with that. Low recycling markets, vaccination participation rates within your organization may be concerning. Implementing return to work programs or policies, really reopening those buildings and having many of those functions that are operating remotely now in a building, a more traditional environment. Dealing with a disaster under the COVID-19 restrictions. Again, something that was very prevalent in 2021, and continued budgetary shortfalls. All right, got about 70% voting here. Excellent. All right, well, Andrea, thank you so much for that. Very helpful for the audience. Thank you again for your participation, and again, helping us and how we can better serve you in this workshop and being able to tailor some of our remarks to some of these issues. Thank you. So I'm going to close this and move on to our agenda. First and foremost, I want to address something on everybody's mind. Again, we have this workshop budgeted from 10 a.m. Central to 1 p.m. Central, and that is, when are we going to take a break? What we have scheduled is we have 3 speakers, which I'm going to tell you about here shortly, who are going to be discussing some of their experiences with COVID-19. We have the break scheduled between 11:30 and 11:45. To take the break, we're going to take 15 minutes so that everybody could stretch their legs, bio break, grab lunch, what have you, and then finish out the remainder of the webinar through 1 p.m. So please believe me, I'm watching the time just like everybody else is. And again, we appreciate your attention to this subject. But the webinar and the presentation is broken out into really 2 different areas. First, let's look at the challenges of the last year. Let's take a look back and really a look forward into what sort of challenges that many solid waste departments in both the public and private sector have dealt with. Let's look at some of the health and safety precautions in conducting debris management, considering some of the federal guidance, as well as how things went in 2020. So we've got some speakers there to deal with that. And then federal funding of COVID-19 activities and recent changes. And then really in that second part, looking at recent changes in disaster debris and public assistance guidance. Before I forget, I wanted to introduce myself, which I really just jumped right in excited about this topic. I'm John Burry. I'm with Tetra Tech, Director of our Post-Disaster Programs. I've been in the industry since 2001, having worked on various programs with H-GAC, as well as many different disasters across the U.S., supporting clients in debris operations, in the Fema Public Assistance Program, hazard mitigation, as well as various HUD programs. I'm excited to be here. I've worked with a lot of different communities and really want to take that real world practical perspective and discuss it here today and provide some of that information to you. With us today from the Tetra Tech team, I have Simon Carlisle, who is with he's a senior program manager with our debris operations located in New Orleans, Louisiana. And with me here in the Houston area is Brian Rutherford. Brian Rutherford is one of our senior planners who is located in the Dickinson and League City area, but offices here in Houston with me and has worked on a number of disaster debris management plans. Simon, of course, brings a wealth of experience in post-disaster programs, and we'll be speaking. You'll be hearing from both of them a little bit later. But really, who I'm here to listen to, and who I think you all will enjoy hearing from, is our three guest speakers who will be speaking in this first portion to really talk about their experiences with debris management. First, we have Harry Hayes, who is former, as of 7 golf days ago, with the City of Houston as the Department of Solid Waste Management's director, as well as chief operating officer for the City of Houston. Lois Rose, who is the landfill operations manager for Sarasota County, Florida, giving a Florida perspective to their operation. And then Jerry Barnett with Republic Services, who will be providing the private sector's perspective on disaster operations in a COVID environment. One of the things, again, I want to encourage you all to do is ask questions, and doing so via the chat. We will take pauses during the course of the webinar to address those questions. So please feel free to do though. We have regular intervals in doing so, and we'll hopefully keep this as interactive as possible. So without further ado, with the introductions, let's get into some of the challenges on COVID-19 on solid waste operations. Obviously, COVID-19 impacting us all. I know that is an understatement, and probably one of the top 4 most impacted departments within municipal county governments, as well as in the private sector, is on solid waste operations. You look at departments of public health who are out in the community battling the virus, and with temperature checks, COVID testing, now looking into the vaccination program. But really, the solid waste operation is that one operation that has had to continue to provide service, much like various other public works department divisions throughout this pandemic, and doing so in very, very challenging times. I mean, you look at the some comments made by Jim Fish, with CEO of Waste Management, and some of the challenges. Number one we've heard from is an increase in residential waste collection. I was talking to some colleagues with the city of Philadelphia, and we'll share some of those articles, has been really this idea that a lot of that stay-at-home orders have had significant impacts in the waste collection on the residential side, and very, very unexpectedly. Again, in addition to this, I mean, obviously folks are out there at home cleaning out attics and garages, and the impact not only on the MSW side, but on the brush and bulky or heavy trash side. We've seen that here locally as well as nationally, which has led to quite a bit of uproars in the ability to timely pick up the debris, timely pick up the MSW as well as brush and bulky. So you look here, places like Baltimore, places like Philadelphia, who have continued to deal with this, Los Angeles, looking at the increased trash collection, and still, in addition to that, increased volumes and dealing with things like staff shortages, people who are at home because they have the virus themselves, who've had to quarantine or isolate, who've also had to take care of those family members. And how do you look at an increase in your workload while managing at or below what you have out there? And obviously, here with at home for me and for many of you in the Houston area, this one article here, stuck at home due to COVID, Houston can't stop cleaning and overwhelming the local trash collector. So again, you look at some comments from Swana. One of the things we've seen in the pandemic is the increase of residential waste, especially in the beginning when we saw increases up to 35% in the amount of trash being put out. And you have the same number of workers and the same amount of trucks to, it's going to take more time to collect. Certainly been a lightning rod issue out there. And for that to really give his real world experience, and a gentleman who needs no introduction and a good friend and colleague over the years, Harry Hayes, I'm going to turn it over to him to provide his perspective on and his experience on the City of Houston's solid waste collection. So with that, Harry, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, am I visible, John? Can you hear me?
Yes, you are, Harry. You are good to go.
Okay, all right, and John is going to drive the slides for me, and so when we get to the end, we'll do the old next slide piece. But let me thank H-GAC and Tetra Tech for asking me to be a part of this. I am certainly glad to share the experiences that I've had after 27 years with the City of Houston, 13 and a half of which were as the solid waste director. And if I may touch on one point, during my tenure as solid waste director, in my first year, we were struck by Hurricane Ike, at the time the largest storm to strike the Gulf Coast. And one of the most frightening experiences that I've ever had, generating a debris field of nearly 5.6 million cubic yards and just really devastating our entire region. But that was just the beginning. Over those 13 years, we also had the Great Drought of 2011 and 2012, which for some of you in the outlying counties received a disaster declaration, because those were also part of the wildfires that plagued southeast Texas. And then in 2015, we had a double whammy with the tornadoes and the floods in the upper Austin area, which came here and became our Rockport tornadoes, the Memorial Day flood of 2015, which impacted about 2/3 of the city of Houston, and followed up with a Halloween flood of 2015, just to ensure that we knew what we were dealing with. And while still completing the final pieces of that, we had the Tax Day flood and the Memorial Day flood of 2016, which inaugurated a new administration. And then finally, as I wrapped up my career, we had Hurricane Harvey, which I don't think any of us really would want to refresh that, but we are in the City of Houston still dealing with that with some of our debris operations on the San Jacinto River and the lake. And then finally, the May Day flood of 2019, which was a localized event in the Kingwood, Northeast Houston area, and then Tropical Storm Imelda. So for 13 years with 8 declared events and more than 10 million cubic yards of debris removed, I can say that I've definitely been baptized by fire, lava, and acid in debris operations. And overlapping that, as we see here, I also spent 7.5 years serving as the city's chief operating officer for Mayor Turner and Mayor Parker. And that included the coordination of our other homeland security and public safety organizations, which obviously have a front row seat for disasters. These are the police department, the fire department, Houston Public Works, fleet management, municipal courts, as well as solid waste. For those of you who may not know, this is about 15,000 of the city's 22,000 employees and 70% of the city's more than $5 billion budget. Go ahead, John. So we will, I want to talk a bit about, what we do with our solid waste operations. As John kind of opened the lane for us, obviously this deals with our garbage, bulky waste, recycling, certainly employee services, and then for this particular pandemic, our homeless services and other critical infrastructure, which have been really stretched. In the background, we have lots of coordination with our member organizations on the public sector that may be simultaneously impacted. So I did serve as a board member for the Solid Waste Association of North America, as we know as SWANA, and then the Municipal Waste Management Association, which is part of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and advisor to the National Waste and Recycling Association, which takes into account all of our private operations. And one piece I want to also highlight here are all of the critical infrastructure areas that we have to be mindful of, which in addition to what I just spoke to for the COVID pandemic would include our health and human services operations, as we are very mindful of how that is going right now with hospitalizations, ambulance services, the vaccination deployment, and then for certain programs and disaster types, our air quality management. Go ahead, please, John. So what happened in Houston, and I'm certain for the rest of you, from March 1st, when we got the official declaration of the pandemic. Well, first and foremost, all of our waste volumes began to immediately increase. As indicated, we did see in the early months our garbage and heavy trash volumes increased over 30%. They've kind of leveled off through the end of the year to where we have about a 20%. I would say also that our recycling participation, that went up about 45%. We had a 45% increase in the amount of material that was collected in our recycling program. Why was that? Well, obviously, as the transmission of the virus was attempting to be slowed and or stopped to get our positivity rates down, we had work home, stay safe orders that were issued, by the governor, by the county judge, and by our local officials, be they mayors or township managers. These also closed various pieces of our community, which included transferring of our children from in-person schooling, be they regular schools or colleges, community colleges, universities, to a virtual aspect, non-critical retail businesses, which did result in some lawsuits, ironically, from some businesses that wanted to reclassify themselves from bars to eating establishments, and then our more traditional clubs and restaurants, and then commercial establishments to include retail shopping. Well, the fact that those businesses were closed and our kids were at home and we were at home, as we are now through this conference, that did not stop consumption. As I indicated to one resident, to be alive means to consume and to generate solid waste. And so those solid wastes were transferred from the various outlets, which in many cases were serviced by our private sector partners, and ended up in our municipal waste stream. So as the article indicated, we're stuck at home and during COVID. We took advantage of the time, but it did overwhelm our local home-based trash collection services, be they public or private. Go ahead, please. What was the impact of that? Because as we had the positivity rates and we also had our first responders, to include our municipal and private solid waste workers needing to follow state law and ensure that the public health space was protected with removal of solid waste. And I would remind us that that is a requirement in the state of Texas, that municipal solid waste service has to happen at least once every 7 days. And so that puts our solid waste operators on the front line to help us abate disease and vector issues, and certainly the COVID pandemic or any debris where we have generated waste streams would do that. Within the first 5 months, we did see that 25% of the city of Houston's solid waste workforce had been impacted by COVID. I unfortunately had to report to the mayor and council that we had lost more than 1,000 employee workdays within the first 5 months of the pandemic. This only accounted for about 35 positive cases of the coronavirus, and unfortunately, one fatality. We had one operations executive who very quickly was taken out by the virus. Again, because we have to maintain the public health space for vector and disease control as state law requires, the public really felt the importance of our solid waste workers during the pandemic. Taking advantage of the time, as people were concerned about what to do and what would happen and how quickly we would get this under control, resulted in our populations doing some very positive things. And I would remind us that over this same time frame, we had various shortages of personal home care items, which I'll talk about in just a second. But we saw lots of material that would have gone to charity outlets such as Goodwill, Salvation Army, other religious services groups that handle resale shops. They were closed in order to help slow the spread of the virus. And so this material ended up at the right of way as part of our solid waste collection system. And so that increased our volume. We saw increases in litter as we saw the home delivery services, as well as some residents who, after a few months, decided to go ahead and do self-evictions from rental properties and move back in with their homeowner, with family members. And so all of this material also ended up in the public space. I would say positively that the National Solid Waste Organization and the GLAD Corporation did put a hand out to help solid waste workers across the nation. They offered $500 stipends, and if any of you want to click the link and see the presentation that was, or the advertisement that was very well done, by the SWANA National Organization and GLAD to support these first responders. It was something that we pushed very heavily, and our Texas solid waste collectors did take advantage of it. And I would thank those of you that did this, as well as the corporations that supported the effort. Much needed. Go ahead, please. Homeless services. Very early on, the Centers for Disease Control in working through how to manage the spread and how to minimize the spread, they did identify, along with our populations in senior citizen centers, they identified the homeless populations as extreme risk given their living conditions and their already poor health. And so my team at the Solid Waste Department, in coordination with the Health Department and the City Council offices, we did a citywide sweep and we identified more than 70 active homeless encampments that were just within the city of Houston. I know for those of you that are in the suburbs or in the outer counties, you all see these things too. They're generally in the transportation infrastructure, under right-of-ways, major highway exchanges where folks have shelter, off the beaten path, if you will, where folks can get off in the woods and put up shanty shacks. But we identified every single one of them because we know that during the day these populations do get out. They are about, and all it takes is one to have an outbreak. We did get the mayor's approval to identify $5 million in our CARES Act funding for the City of Houston Solid Waste Division to go out and clean and disinfect on a regular weekly schedule encampment sites all over the city. This has probably been one of the most visible beyond the health department testing and now inoculations that residents see, and has given them great comfort to know that there is active management of this in the city. Sharing with my colleagues in the state and at the national level, they have also modeled the Houston program to provide the same types of services in other major cities in the state and around the nation. We know in the city of Houston that we have between 4,000 and 4,500 homeless people that are living on the street. We know that given the various deferrals of evictions that have been held up by the state and the federal government, that there is potential that this number could grow if people don't have opportunities to transition to housing or get some income. And so it's something that the city of Houston is very mindful of. Go ahead, John. And then finally, I did put this here so that we could remind ourselves of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Safety Administration, just how difficult it is to maintain the order that we've come to comfortably expect when we have a disaster. And then certainly the pandemic, in my opinion, has been one of the worst disasters that we have experienced because it has not yet ended. This has been a 9-month slow-moving hurricane that has wrought economic and physical destruction in every sector. A few things that I would identify on the essential and critical workers. As you look around the little wedge here, our commercial facilities have been impacted. Our critical manufacturing has been impacted. We have had impacts to our waterways, our defense industrial base, with the president having to tap into the Defense Production Act to help speed some of the critical care items that we need, such as medical devices, PPE, even some of the most basic things such as toilet paper and sanitizer. Our energy has been tapped like at no other time. Emergency services. One of the unique things I found here was in the financial services market, where there was a shortage of change. Little bitty things that we don't think about. And then certainly food and agriculture, where we have seen various shortages of products. Certainly in the meat industry, we've seen a pork shortage, a chicken shortage, a beef shortage. And then certainly the prices during those shortages have not helped. Our government facilities have been closed. There have been no in-court services. We have seen early releases from our jails and prisons, all in order to try and maintain the spread of this slow-moving hurricane that we call the coronavirus. Healthcare and public health facilities have been impacted. Information technology, for several months, you could not readily get a camera so that you could be a part of a meeting such as this, because there was a shortage of them or a backlog. Our transportation system, airports, again, as I indicated, our water services. And then behind all of this, how we move things around the country. Our commercial drivers have been in such high demand due to the shifting of resources to our private homes that it has impacted our solid waste operation, which is a means to maintain public health and safety. And so a solid waste driver or a commercial CDL license holder, whether they be a B or an A, those folks are now demanding salaries in the $80,000 to $90,000 per year range. They are receiving sign-in bonuses of $10,000 to $12,000 per year. We have seen a shifting of a lot of the drivers that myself and my Republic counterparts would normally have. They've gone to long-range transportation services or to our Amazon, UPS, FedEx delivery services because of the salary changes. And so again, as I come to the end of my portion of this, I would say that as we think about our critical infrastructure and what happens to us during these events, there are really two pieces of it. Obviously the first piece is how we react and respond, and then the second piece is how do we maintain the response as we have pressures from our critical infrastructure services. We have met the challenge. We will continue to meet the challenge. We know that there is some resilience that is required by our workers and managers. And fortunately, we have been able to meet those at every step. So with that, let me pass back over to John.
Thank you very much, Harry. And with that, I want to pause to see if we could take any questions from the audience. And for that, I'm going to ask Erin to unmute her mic and see if we have any questions at this point.
So I have not seen any yet. So if anybody has any, quickly type those in and we will get those answered for you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Erin. And thank you, Harry, for the gift of your time and to provide your perspective. Certainly, with your last closing remarks, highlighting some of the challenges that we faced, and certainly there's been no change of a change of life, if you will, for all of us, whether it's some of the negatives or some of the positive ones, like binge watching shows like Tiger King this past year. Some of the memes, of course, we have our toilet paper memes that I really enjoyed. And then, of course, which was a gift around my house, which was the coffee mug, which says, "You're speaking with your mic is off," which is what I get told on a almost daily basis. And it's the fact that it's 10:45 and I haven't been told that is a minor miracle here. So with that, I want to keep going on. And
John, we do have one question here.
Excellent. Excellent.
So it says, does Houston have a public camping ban or ordinance? If so, how are you dealing with this increase in homelessness?
The short answer is yes. There is a ban on camping in the city parks. There is a ban on obstructing the public rights of way. And so our city ordinance is a little fuzzy. And the reason it's a little fuzzy, Aaron, is because we have ongoing challenges by the ACLU, not just in Houston, but from a national perspective on Fourth Amendment rights and where can people be in public spaces. And so basically one can sleep on the sidewalks, but only after 10 o'clock at night. Most of the property that is, and they have to be gone by 7 o'clock in the morning. So there is enforcement and citations that could be written. Most of the spaces that we manage for the homeless encampments, they're actually state of Texas property. They're the Texas highway infrastructure system under the freeways. And so we do what we do to maintain the city's public health and safety and to try to offer some basic care services to folks who are residents of Houston. We also know that most of the people that are in these encampments, more than half of them have mental health and major health care issues, which we would hope if the governor ever expanded the Medicare services, it would provide immediate support for these populations to be in facilities. They would have access to health care and facilities that would help them deal with some very deeply ingrained personal care issues. Did I answer the question, Ken?
It looks like maybe there's another, what else? How many official homeless camps are there in Houston, and how many citizens live in these state-provided locations? Immediate support would be a miracle to this population. And yes, to your question about answering the question.
Well, as far as the city having an official encampment like Austin does or San Antonio does, the answer is zero. We don't have any come here locations and pitch a tent. So we've not done that. Our homeless services group is still in the process of trying to locate an appropriate area in the city where this could happen, and these populations would have access to transportation and health care that they could receive. I think, Ken, you may be thinking about what the governor did in Austin, where he took TxDOT property and he declared that an official state of Texas homeless encampment. They marked it off. There's also one in San Antonio that we have gone to and looked at. Most of the city of Houston's inner real estate is occupied or it is under development as we go through this regentrification process. And so if we could get some help from Austin, it would greatly support the city's effort to have people where they need to be, which is sheltered, either in a care facility or in a, going through programs where they can transition back into a regular life cycle.
Is there another question or?
There is one more question. How are you handling the pickup of debris and trash from these camps?
John, if you can flip back to, I believe it's the third slide from my piece.
Right here?
Yeah, homeless services. So what you see here in the first picture on the left, the city of Houston bought two rear loader trucks, and they are outfitted with the COVID logo. They only provide service mattresses to these encampments. We also purchased 6 extended bed pickup trucks. We bought 20-foot trailers. We have a contract with a hazardous waste mitigation company. You can see in the photograph below that there is some issue with the personal waste of individuals at these sites. And then the photo you see to the right is actually just downtown near Minute Maid Park. And so this is probably every 2 weeks you will see this scene. And so what happens is we go to these locations, we pick up the mattresses, old mattresses, furniture, all types of bulky material that you think to yourself, well, how the hell does this get here? And the homeless populations, they routinely help the city workers clean up their work sites or their living areas. And then just as soon as we clean it up, 2 or 3 hours later, various support groups come through who believe they are helping, and they give fresh tents, they give new mattresses, they give clothes. I mean, they provide food, they provide all types of material that you would not believe that ends up in these encampments. And so, I mean, it's an ongoing problem. And what we ask the public to do is we really ask them, if you want to donate to a facility where people can get rounded services, rounded care services. Because what we find that happens is, let's just say John bought new mattresses. Well, he wants to do the right Christian thing, and he takes the old mattresses down to a homeless site. And the populations take them, they sleep on them until they get wet or soiled, and then they give them up. And then it happens again after we clean up the area. We sanitize the areas, we remove the soil. It is a very thorough process. And then probably every 2 to 3 months, given some of the health issues of some of the populations, we may learn that there is a disease, if you will, at an area, and there may be a lot of human waste, and we will get a public health declaration from the city's chief health officer, and we have to do a more comprehensive cleaning. These cleanings range anywhere from $40,000 to $70,000 for 1 day of work, which means we have to capture every drop of sanitizing and cleaning agents that we spray. We have to remove the soil and replace it. At certain times, the medical officer may remand some of these individuals to facilities where they can be better tended to because of the severity of their issues. And so you have drugs, you have alcohol, and you also have human spirit, right? And so I've seen at some of the encampments in the winter where people have personal generators, and then the entrepreneur comes out, they sell power to each other, right? So I've been there and seen them sell power. You know, I'm a homeless person, I've got a generator, John wants to plug in, I charge him $10. Or they command a site and they charge other people rent to be in the area in one of their tents. So it's a very deep problem that just the cleaning is not going to solve it. It involves much, much more.
Certainly, we've seen it in a number of different ways. Harry describing some of the homeless services with the solid waste side, but also Harris County and City of Houston working together to establish non-congregate sheltering operations at multiple hotel sites throughout the Houston area, so that those homeless population who have been infected by the virus have a place to self-isolate or quarantine for suspected cases, and doing so in a safe environment that helped mitigate the risk of the spread within some of the homeless areas.
Ron, do we have time for one more question?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, it says, were the rear end load trucks, oh, it just, apparently another question.
Yes, I see it. Was all of the equipment that we purchased and that we used bought with CARES dollars? And the answer is yes. Every
Okay.
penny. We have about $5.5 million allocated to these programs, and it's all CARES funding to include the temporary personnel expenses that we had to incur to augment our workforce. And yes, we will. The other question, can someone provide a list of credible homeless organizations for donations? I will work with our homeless services team. We'll get that over to Erin and she can send it out to the registrants.
All right, thank you. Director Hayes, I appreciate it. As always, a wealth of knowledge, a wealth of information, and his experiences, again, spanning 27 years, are always appreciated, and especially here with the last year dealing with COVID. Obviously, another big thing is on the manpower side. It's one of the top areas, and we looking back at some of our poll answers, having to deal with staffing shortages and those impacts to the solid waste operation, as well as routing and collection. I've seen communities who've had to change the way they deploy their personnel, and to make sure that they have cohorts of various teams, 2 or 3 in the truck at any one period of time, and keeping that same schedule versus traditional model in that community where it changed up on a daily basis or weekly basis. So, looking at that, then the isolation and quarantine due to potential exposure, and even those individuals who are city or county sanitation staff that were exposed or had the virus and didn't have a place to isolate. Say they were in a 1-bedroom house, apartment, and living with a family that a spouse, as well as 1 or 2 individuals that they provided care for, whether they were children or the elderly. And a lot of communities were also called into action to provide hotel space for those individuals who were impacted on the job and needed assistance with isolation and quarantine for a period of time. I know Harris County, as well as the city of Houston, did that with the Cambria Hotel here in the area, as well as a couple of other locations in the area, also seeking federal assistance for that, as an oh, by the way. But certainly something with staff was, I would say, from my perspective, one of the, if not the number one issue that the departments faced. In addition, many communities had or were looking at hazard pay for those individuals who are on those front lines working like EMTs or health workers who saw that hazard pay. A lot of sanitation workers, a lot of solid waste management staff were demanding the hazard pay here within various communities. You see the articles in Virginia Beach, saw some protests even in Philadelphia. You look at New Orleans, and then also even demanding more and better personal protective equipment from being impacted or infected by the virus. So not only looking at those things like gloves, masks, face shields, implementing some of the plexiglass in those areas where you were congregating, tailgate talks and other areas having to do that in an outdoor manner, all those sorts of things the solid waste departments were having to deal with on a daily basis. Look here, the Pittsburgh Post Gazette, also an area where they were dealing with strikes, walkouts of municipal solid waste workers who felt like their needs weren't being met in the pandemic as frontline workers. And really, solid waste staff are first responders. Again, sometimes they don't think of them or they think of folks as non-traditional first responders, but in every disaster I see, that's who's on the front line, whether it's rescuing individuals with high water vehicles, addressing debris operations, clearing roads. It's the solid waste teams that are out there. And with that, I want to now turn it over to Lois Rose with Sarasota County, Florida. Lois, are you there? Hey, Lois.
I am trying. Can you
Hey.
trying to get my
Excellent. Well, Lois, we can hear you. Can't quite see you, but you see your picture there. Lois is the landfill operations manager of Sarasota County, Florida. And here we go. Lois, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you very much for having me today. A little bit farther south and to the east of our country than you guys are residing. I guess the most of you are over in Texas. So thank you, and offering a mid-sized county perspective in the state of Florida of what we've gone through with COVID. I've also managed hurricanes and stuff, and over my 30 some years. So it's not fun as was earlier presented, but it's a chore that I have to do and a task that I thoroughly enjoy doing. Keeps me occupied and busy. So going to give you a little bit of demographics on Sarasota County. As I stated, we're in the state of Florida. We're on the southwest coast, and we're about 60 miles south of Tampa. Our county covers 725 square miles. We have a population that does fluctuate, not as much as it has in the past, but we're typically around 450,000 permanent residents, and we can go up about 100,000 through the winter months as well, with what we call our snowbirds coming down to see us. This year we're pretty short on that because of the restrictions in Canada and their travel. So even though I know it's not good for our economy, it's been pretty pleasant traveling on the highways and stuff because they're not overloaded. Our main moneymaker for the county is tourism, is our main industry, primarily coming from the US and from Europe and Canada. And I just saw an article that came out, I believe it was yesterday, that Sarasota is the best place to retire according to US News and World Report. So I'm sure that will continue to increase our building and all that. Sarasota County has 4 municipalities that lay within it, and then the unincorporated area. I work for the county, and we manage the unincorporated area as far as residential and commercial garbage collections. And then we are the only MSW landfill in the county that the municipalities bring waste to. So there are other facilities for C&D recycling and also yard waste collection, but we are the only MSW landfill where the garbage that's generated in Sarasota County comes to. We run about 1,300 tons per day, and we are a contract operated facility, meaning that Sarasota County owns the landfill. We build the infrastructure, but we have a company right now. It's the old Advanced Disposal that runs our landfill as far as burying garbage, processing yard waste, and we have the old WCA, which is now GFL Environmental, that runs our C&D recycling facility, MRF, for us. Our residential unincorporated area where we collect from is about 160,000 in population. When COVID hit, the county formed a policy group that's made up of our county administrator, assistant county administrators, and our department of directors, along with emergency management. They pretty much put out the rules and guidelines that departments needed to follow during the COVID crisis that began, as Harry pointed out, in March of this past year. Basically, they restricted direct face-to-face contact with the public. They put our workforce team, which I believe is around 2,500 employees. Anybody that could e-work was allowed to e-work, and that has not been changed yet. We still have the majority of our administrative type folks that are out e-working. And as they have slowly opened operations like our libraries and things of that nature, they have brought that workforce back in. Solid waste, we still have, I believe, 5 people that are still e-working, which are main administrative type of people out of our buildings. And then they also implemented procedures for COVID, such as when an employee is exposed or if an employee is exhibiting a symptom, what has to be done. So those were the things that, and they come up with a bunch of other things, and they used to meet on a daily basis. They don't meet, I believe, daily anymore. But if we want to change something that they changed at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, then we have to go back to the policy group to get something implemented in the solid waste group. So what did that do? Basically, they couldn't shut down the solid waste collections or landfill operations, because if we do, we know that that's going to cause a bigger health crisis than the COVID pandemic did. That's the reason why we're in the business, is health-related concerns. So they knew we had to keep us open, and we've done very well at that. We had a temporary shutdown of some of our non-critical sources. We get a lot of site visitors to our landfill site. We are 7,000 acres that pretty much is surrounded by nature habitat. So we get a lot of people that like to view wildlife and birds coming to our facilities. So visitors were restricted from coming in. They're no longer allowed, and that still is in place to this day. We're not allowing visitors on our site. Our household hazardous waste collection programs were all suspended. Eventually, after about a month of residents complaining that they didn't have a place to take their household hazardous waste to, we implemented an appointment only process, which didn't go too well. That's the direction that the policy group wanted us to take. It lasted about 3 weeks, and they were getting so many calls that the appointments were filling up way too fast, and that they had stuff and they paid for the service and they wanted it. So what we did is we reopened our household hazardous waste collection facilities, reducing as much face-to-face contact as we can, and obviously implementing those COVID procedures of face mask and gloves and social distancing and lots of hand washing and things of that nature, and wiping down services. We also provide free to residents of Sarasota County compost and fines. That's something that they used to have to come into the landfill and weigh out of. And we changed that, where we relocated that outside of our facility where they can come and get it and not impact any of the solid waste staff. So that's something that we shut down for a little while, and then we've reopened, and it's working very well. So that's a live and learn experience that we will probably keep in place, where people do not have to come into the landfill facility to pick up the compost and fines. They can do it at a different location. Building closures. We are still under closures with our county buildings, including our landfill buildings to the public. So they have not opened up. We still do all virtual pretty much meetings unless something is an emergency and a dire need to get face to face. So we're still operating under the closure with not allowing the public into our buildings. We also had a process in place where we had spotters throughout our facilities that had to or have to verify scale tickets to make sure the person is in the correct location and that they actually have weighed in and have a ticket to dispose of whatever they're bringing us. That's obviously a face-to-face contact. So we have been a little bit more lenient in how that's done, that the person doesn't have to sign the ticket anymore. They just need to visually look at it, and then they'll make a call. So we'll probably leave that in place as well, because it's worked fairly well on that. And the other big thing that they did to us is they took cash away. As probably a lot of you have experienced, a lot of things are cashless now. So we are still cashless. We've asked time and time again to get that reinstituted because a lot of our customers do not have credit. They do not have credit cards. So they've had to go out and buy prepay cards that they can use in our when they come to the landfill to dispose of something. So that's one that we have not been able to reverse yet. And I don't see them allowing us to in the near future. So we have gone to a strictly cashless system. Credit cards, or they can set up advanced payment account that they have money in the process. With being in a remote location, our internet connections are not the greatest. And the amount of time that it took us to process a credit card was a long time. And when I say a long time, I want to say a couple minutes. But when you have people 20, 30 cars waiting in line to check out, and it's taking you a couple minutes to run a transaction, that starts backing up your customers, and your customers don't get excited about having to wait longer than what they feel they should. So we have got some restrictions lifted on how our credit cards are processed. We no longer have to have people implement PIN numbers. And we've cut one of our processes out on the swipe. That was a process that was in place due to our clerk's office, our clerk of the court that is responsible for all the money in the county and how it's handled and goes. So we have made some progress on credit card transactions now that they take us a fraction of the time they used to. So that's a good thing as well. Going into collections, so we collect from roughly 160,000 residential units. One of the first things that hit, and that's all contractor operated, that's done. Our contractor for that service is Waste Management. They started getting impacted with their drivers. So once someone, and they usually run 2-person trucks. So once somebody in a truck got exposed or started showing symptoms, it shut 2 people out of the truck. So it doesn't take long for that to snowball. And I believe it was said that Houston had 1,000 drivers out, or I think that's the number that I heard earlier in the presentation. So it's a snowball effect. So what happened here is they pick up basically 3 main things from the residents. They pick up garbage, they pick up recyclables, and they pick up yard waste. And I don't know how the decision was made, but it was made to suspend yard waste collections, not recyclables, but the yard waste. So they shut down picking up yard waste at the curb. Well, that didn't go too well with the residents that say, I pay for that service and I want my yard waste. I want to be able to take it somewhere, and I've already paid you for it, so I don't want to have to pay again. So that put additional pressure onto the landfill, where we were trying to limit the amount of customer contacts because we needed to keep our scale staff healthy. Because if they go down, we go down. So we had to put together a program to handle residents coming in to drop off yard waste with minimal impacts to our operations. So we did that with a registration through Smartsheet and tablets, and it worked fairly well. And we kept that going for a few weeks past the time that the yard waste service was reinstituted, and hopefully satisfied a lot of customers and minimized complaints. So out of the collections, that's the only issue that we have had through this whole entire COVID pandemic, was a brief suspension of yard waste services. That was about 3 weeks in total. So that's pretty good. As far as the landfill, with everyone staying home, as Harry mentioned, you get a lot more garbage. And what happened, and I'm going to ask if I can share a screen here in a minute. We didn't change our tonnage all that much. Our tonnage changed where it came from. So our commercial went down, our residential went up, but to us at the landfill, it's just a truck, the different truck that brings it in. So our tonnages stayed fairly consistent. But we did have a lot of customers that wanted to go somewhere. They didn't want to sit at home. They were tired of sitting at home. So they thought that they would load their truck up with even cardboard boxes because they could drive out to the landfill and get rid of those. So we experienced a lot of that type of situation of undue increase in customer numbers on us that we had to accommodate. And actually during the COVID crisis on a Saturday, we're only open half a day. We actually set a record number on one of the Saturdays. We serviced over 700 customers, which was just a crazy day. And a lot of it is what we call our mom and pops or residential customers that were just bringing us out, yard waste from cleaning up the yard, or load garbage from cleaning out the garage or whatever. But we literally got people bringing us 2 and 3 cardboard boxes because they wanted to go out and do something. They wanted to go for a drive. So that put a little bit of undue necessary stress on the system. Another one that I never thought would happen, and I always prayed over the 30 years that it would never happen, was our scale house staff. We usually run with a team of 3 people in our scale house. One of them came down with a fever. That shut the other 2 out according to our policies because there was a potential exposure there. So we have a normal scale house rotating staff of 4 people. So that left me with 1 person and a supervisor that knew anything about our scale system and how to work the software and everything else. So we quickly learned, got a team together of staff that could supplement the vacancies left by these 3 individuals while we waited for test results. I can say that we had a direct contact into our director of public health that helped tremendously and has continued to help us tremendously, that if we do have a staff with symptoms or we have someone that has a potential exposure, they will get us tested, and we usually have our result within 24 hours. So in this particular case, we didn't get our result till it was about 2-day turnaround. This was towards the beginning of the COVID thing, which was still a really good turnaround, right? And it turned out negative. So we got to bring those staff back in fairly quickly. But I was just thinking, wow, what are we going to do if we get hit again on the scale house staff? Or this really becomes something, because, you know, we have to weigh and collect according to state statutes, and we have to collect fees according to our bonds that we fund to build our infrastructure with. So that has caused us to rethink contingency planning. So now we have got a much larger circle of solid waste staff that know how to operate the scales, at least minimally, to keep us going. So that was definitely a lesson learned. And I always thought the hurricane was gonna, you know, knock our scale staff out, but unfortunately it is the COVID pandemic that really opened the eyes of something that we got to do. And if I can share a screen, the last thing I just wanted to share, and hopefully this will go.
Yep. Go ahead, Lois.
Alrighty. Is that all being shared? Can you see a couple graphs?
Yeah.
Okay, so I just wanted to show up in the upper left-hand corner, that's our garbage. As I said, we're about 1,300 tons a day. So this is based on monthly tonnage. So the red line is our 2020 tonnage, and the blue line is 2019. So you can see when we get into the April, May, we pretty much stood our own. We didn't really have that much of a decline. You can see going into our summer months is when our Europeans and stuff start coming, and we have more people from the US coming to Florida. Why they would want to come to Florida in the summer and sweat is beyond me, but people do, and apparently they really like it. We have Siesta Key Beach here, which is one of the top 10 beaches in the United States as well. Really seen it came down, but then we're kind of on an uptick again in December. So that's probably showing that, yes, some of our winter residents have come back, and people are tending to travel more now than what they did at the beginning of the pandemic. So really not on the garbage side impacted all that much, just where it's coming from. But tonnage wise, we stayed pretty consistent. Our yard waste, though, you can see what happened in mid-March and April. Everyone just started, I guess, beautification projects and cleaning out their yard waste and their shrubs and their trees and everything else. And that pretty much has continued to trend upward over 2019 for the entire year. Going to C&D, which is construction demolition debris, we're not the only game in town, but for here, you can see what happened when COVID crisis started. Things kind of went to a complete halt in the business industry, or building industry. They, you know, stopped building and doing things, and you can see that very well by our tonnage. And then they kind of got things back in line around June, and, you know, we're back up high again, higher than when we were in 2019, which right now we've got, I want to say about 15,000 active permits in the unincorporated area for building, which is pretty big for a county of our size. And tires just fluctuate all over the place. But anyways, I just wanted to show that with you, that we really haven't been impacted as much as the Houston area was. So different demographics, different situation. And, you know, we're just kind of status quo, treading water, keeping our head above it.
That's right. Thank you so much, Lois. Extremely interesting presentation. I will tell you your story about those mom and pops wanting to just get out and take their trash somewhere. certainly resonates with me during a lot of that time where I felt like I just wanted to get out as well. So certainly is applicable here. If I can go back to sharing here. With that, I will open it up to any questions from the audience. For Lois, Aaron, I will ask you, do we have any here or anybody typing away?
I have not received any questions yet. So.
Okay.
Oh, there's one.
Hey.
It says, has your facility increased its recycling efforts utilizing the new plastic recouping processes during the pandemic?
Not to my knowledge. We are, our recyclables get collected in the residential area and they're set up to a single stream recycler. We recently instituted single stream collection. So our recycling rates have gone up from that, but I'm not aware of them doing anything new with the processes. That's not really I'm more landfill. So I'm out of that. I can certainly ask, but I haven't heard that they're doing anything new. So my assumption is they're not.
Excellent. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Lois.
Mm-hmm.
From the question from the audience, anyone else?
Nothing yet.
All right. Well, we'll check back in. Obviously, we have the chat function enabled. We appreciate everybody's participation and interactive. We've had some great speakers, and we're going to continue that trend as we move on in our workshop on the pandemic. And really, we've talked about collection operations. We've talked about the staff piece. Now looking at disposal, recycling. You're looking at some data from back in May when the recycling market was really started that decline, and certainly something that we, when you're looking forward to 2021, will it be bouncing back as it was pre-COVID, or will we have this sustainment? Certainly, you heard Lois talking about those individuals coming to the landfill and dropping off just regular old cardboard. You've heard Harry talk about the Amazon Prime, which I should have worn my T-shirt that says Amazon Prime there, because sometimes I feel like I am with my buying habits. But looking at recycling from commercial now to residential, and changes to that due to these online realtors, the Zappos, the Amazons of the world, and as Lois mentioned about the yard waste program that had been suspended. In some cases, you're looking at recycling programs being suspended. I know Harry was speaking yesterday about a brush and bulky program. We've seen other programs in other areas where their recycling programs had been suspended in order to focus on yard waste, brush and bulky, and municipal solid waste. But it's certainly met with the ire of the community and draws a lot of attention. So again, kind of wrapping it up before I turn it over to Jerry, is the fact that communities around the nation, both public and private sector, have many, many challenges, everything from PPE to looking at paying for overtime, to navigating the rules of the federal reimbursement opportunities that are out there, which we're going to talk about after our break, hiring additional staff, contractors, and suspension of services. So a myriad of challenges. And in addition to that, in some cases, you look at the Lake Charles, you look at the Gulfport, Mississippi, Mobile, Alabama, Santa Rosa County and Escambia County, Florida, Pensacola area, that have had tremendous impacts of hurricanes. You look at Iowa and the Cedar Rapids area, had a derecho that they had to deal with disasters in these sorts of challenging times. But for that, I want to now turn it over to Jerry Barnett with Republic Services to provide the private sector's perspective. He's got some prepared remarks. And Jerry, we're in good shape for time, so I will go ahead and turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks for having us today. We're excited to be part of this workshop, and it's always good to, participate with Harry Hayes, as we have a partnership with the city of Houston. So it was great to hear from him today. Over the course of the next few minutes, I'll highlight the impacts we are seeing from the pandemic, what we anticipate moving forward, and how we are adapting to the changes in our business, along with staying focused on our customers, our people here at Republic Services. If you can go to the next slide, please. Perfect. Yep. What major changes have we seen in recycling, you might ask? Well, in the early 2000s, majority of us still received newspapers at home as a way to read news. Now, majority of us use our electronic devices to read what's going on. So newspaper has fallen by the wayside. Previously, 48,000 plastic bottles equated to 1 ton. Now 92,000 plastic bottles equal 1 ton. You might ask why? Well, the plastic bottles have way less plastic due to lightweighting. As we all know, like water bottles used to be able to stand up by themselves previously when they were empty. Now they basically fall over due to how thin the plastic actually is. We now have to process almost 2 times the amount, which requires more processing, which equates to more cost. The last 3 years, we have seen 2 global events that we're all familiar with that have transformed our industry. China soared being first and foremost, starting in 2018, and COVID-19. In 2018, China soared resulted in China's exit from the global recycling commodity markets, which disrupted the markets and values, which continues today. Next slide, please. Thanks. The pandemic, the national lockdown in March drove a huge shift in volume. Our commercial volumes are down 20%. We don't see this changing anytime soon as our business continues to close, as businesses continue to close, and low occupancy across major industries such as hotels, restaurants, venues, and more. Our residential volumes are up 30%. People are working from home, cooking more at home rather than dining out, deliveries to go and packaging, creating more waste at home. This type of shift in material to residential curbside is driving contamination concerns within the recycling market. Between the national sword and the global pandemic, we are feeling additional pressure on the industry. Next slide, please. As mentioned, volumes are shifting from the pandemic. Commercial and industrial volumes decreased and residential volumes increased as much as 30%, which we anticipate remaining higher than normal due to people staying home, companies allowing people to work remote indefinitely or a lot longer into late 21 or 22. And then also increases in e-commerce and at-home deliveries. Residential increases at the curb drive additional costs due to the added routes we have to add, as well as the added disposal that we are collecting within the residential line of business. Next slide, please. Materials changing from the pandemic. The pandemic has shifted both the volumes between customer segments as well as the materials collected. For example, large drops in cardboard and office paper with commercial offices, as majority of us are no longer in commercial buildings working. We're all at home. In addition, we've seen increases in small cardboard from everyone's Amazon deliveries that we're all getting at home. And we've heard Amazon a couple times during the presentation. So it is real. We're seeing an uptick in those small cardboard boxes at the residential curbside. Next slide, please. As the country reopens, we continue to see volume trends. Residential volumes expected to remain elevated over the next 2 years. More companies allowing employees to work from home and students electing to do online learning. These commercial volumes will increase slowly as the markets recover, but as we have seen, many struggle to recover and will not fully reopen. For instance, travel is unlikely to recover until late 21 or even 22. We've seen a lot of restaurants go out of business or only open halfway, which the volumes continue to remain low on the commercial side. We are living in our new normal, or what we like to say is our new normal, and we anticipate these shifts in volumes across our contracts. Next slide, please. Here at Republic Services, safety is our #1 priority. In Texas alone, we have 3,200 frontline employees. We have provided proper PPE to all of our employees. We've added more frequent cleaning both inside of our facilities and inside the cabs of our trucks to ensure the safety of all of our employees and customers. Our quick response to implement these added safety measures allow us to protect our employees and ensure business continues. We all know no one wants their driver to become sick and miss trash collection day. After all, volumes are up 30%. We don't have the space at home for all the trash we are generating. With that said, Republic Services has a 99.9% on-time pickup rate, so we do have the infrastructure to support the needs of our customers. Next slide, please. Many of you might have seen or heard about our Commitment to Serve campaign we launched in 2020. Our Commitment to Serve is a $20 million commitment to recognize our frontline employees and help support our small businesses within our local communities. Here in Texas alone, we spent over $1 million at local restaurants providing our frontline employees with lunch and take-home family meals for 4 people. This really helped out in the initial part of COVID when we wanted to ensure our employees were safe and healthy, showing up to work on time to perform the job that's needed while we take care of their families at home. In addition, we gave our frontline team a $100 gift card during the first few months of the pandemic to spend locally and help support the communities we serve, which was another $1 million spent locally within the community in Texas. Next slide, please. Even with all the changes China's sword and the pandemic have added to our plate here at Republic Services, we are still committed to our sustainability goals and have built a roadmap to 2030. We will continue making safety our #1 priority. We will achieve and maintain employee engagement scores. We will focus on climate leadership and invest in the communities by charitable givings. These are all part of our long-term goals and commitment to sustainability. Next slide, please. Not only is Republic Services a leader within the recycling and waste industry, but we continue to achieve many awards, which you see listed here, that make Republic Services a great community partner and also a great company to work for. When you are considering your next service provider, I hope you will consider our team here at Republic Services. Thank you for your time today.
Hey, thank you so much, Jerry. Let's see. Awesome. I want to take a moment before we move on to our break to see if there are any questions for Jerry. Aaron, I'll ping you once again to see if there's any questions out there.
I have not received any yet.
Okay. Hey, Jerry, I had one question, extremely interesting, and it's great to get the private sector's perspective. I'm curious, was there one thing that surprised you personally with how COVID impacted I guess Republic Services or the waste industry as a whole? Maybe not something just limited to your organization, but as a whole. Over the last 10 months or so, the last almost a year?
Yeah, I think, the pandemic has really impacted our industry as a whole from the volume shifting, but more importantly, as we've seen across the US, different cities, different counties, different states are taking different measures to protect people from COVID. And we've seen certain markets where cities and counties got out in front of it ahead of time and implemented really safe measures and shut things down. And we've had low employees affected from COVID. So we haven't had as many people out due to the sickness. And that's been helpful for us to keep routes up and running. where we had other smaller markets where, they may have not implemented safety procedures within that county with people wearing masks or shutting down restaurants and things of that nature as quickly. And we've seen an uptick in those markets with people being affected by COVID. But luckily here at Republic Services, we have our Blue Crew and we have a vast employees that we can send to help out those markets and ensure our routes and service stay up and running.
Excellent. Thank you, Jerry. Aaron, I saw that blink a couple of times. Didn't know if that was questions or.
We got one question.
Okay.
Okay, it says, could you speak more on the climate leadership sustainability goals?
So can you elaborate a little bit more on what you're looking for?
Wait until that person types it in.
Because I think what they're asking for is what we're probably doing around our climate leadership goals. And we put out a sustainability index, and I can send that to you, Aaron or John, and we can send it out to the group. And it just shares what we're doing from a sustainability standpoint at all levels of our organization. We're reinvesting in, new recycling centers across the nation, even though China's soared and the recycling market has plummeted and it's not a very beneficial market today. We're continuing to reinvest in the recycling to ensure that we have the resources there to provide that service. In addition to that, we're looking at CNG trucks and implementing CNG trucks within our fleet, just another way to reduce our carbon footprint. We're looking at, all different ways to captivate, reducing our footprint and increasing our sustainability initiatives across the organization at all levels.
Okay. And the person said, sounds good about getting the report you said, or the.
And Aaron, for the city of Houston, I'll send you the link to our climate action plan, which is available online and was adopted by council, I believe, midsummer last year.
Okay, thank you. You can share that with everybody.
Yeah, definitely.
Excellent. Well, what I'll do now is, if we don't have any more questions, just as a little bit of a precursor before we take a break, is we're going to be talking about health and safety precautions related to COVID-19 in disaster debris removal operations, a little bit of a look back into 2021. We're also going to be focusing on some of the financial programs that are out there related to the Treasury programs, the FEMA public assistance programs, and looking at 2021 and beyond. And then finally wrapping things up with an overview of some of the recent changes with the release of the FEMA public assistance policy guide, as well as the new FEMA BRIC program. So please, with that, I'm going to go ahead and say that we will reconvene on the official cell phone of mine at 11:55. So we're taking a break here at 11:38, almost 11:40. Everybody take bio breaks or grab lunch, and then we'll do a little bit of a lunch and learn after that. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we will take a pause and come back at 11:55. Thanks, everybody, for your participation and interest. All right. We are at 11:55 exactly by the official iPhone of me, and we're here to move into the next phase of our discussion where we're talking about health and safety and COVID. And we hope you all got a good lunch, or at least got your lunch and bringing it back to your desk. I, for one, had an incredible lunch. I'll tell you, one of my favorite things, Tetra Tech actually moved offices right before the pandemic. We're located in the energy corridor here in the Houston area off of Willcrest and Westheimer and Briar Forest area, right off the Beltway, and recently moved our offices expansion and a little bit of a refresh here. But one of the things that has been a godsend of the pandemic has been the little boutique, I don't want to say greasy spoon, but T's Kitchen, which is located in the basement or the first floor of our office building here, and has great sandwiches and great burgers. But I'll tell you, her hot dish that she has every day has been incredible. I am a big fan of the sides. I'm Nashville. They have the meat and threes. I'm Luby's or Piccadilly or wherever cafeteria. I am one of those guys who I'll focus on what sides I'm going to order versus what is my meat or the main entree. And she does an incredible job of the fried okra, the greens, the rice, the white beans, all that sort of stuff. And so that has been my little silver lining as we have returned to work at our offices. Here is T's Kitchen on the first floor here at our place off City West Boulevard. But for that, I am going to move on to health and safety precautions from COVID-19, other infectious diseases, and want to turn it over to my colleague, Brian Rutherford. Brian and I have worked together for close to 13 or 15 years now, and coming to us from Galveston County, his former employer, and joining us in public health preparedness space, his background, as well as continuity of operations, pandemic flu planning, mass casualty planning, and is going to lead us through this part of our presentation. Brian, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, John. Hopefully y'all can hear me all right. So yeah, I just want to go through some of the health and safety information. We've had a lot of lessons learned from this. And so, we talk about, other infectious disease incidents in the title of this section. So we want to make sure we capture any of those lessons learned. So hopefully this won't happen again anytime soon. But if it does, we'll at least have a better game plan and it won't go quite as badly as this one has. So anyway, the Centers for Disease Control, first of all, they have developed some guidance for waste collectors and recyclers regarding COVID-19. John, you can advance that one. And so, most of this is pretty common sense stuff that we've heard all along. If you're sick, stay home, notify your supervisor. If you have a sick family member, you need to stay home with them, notify your supervisor. Of course, limit any close contacts, wear a cloth face covering as much as possible, and then also clean and disinfect frequently touched surfaces. Next one. In addition, of course, in addition to wearing your face covering, they also say to be sure and just wear the normal PPE that you normally wear, gloves, eye protection, that kind of thing. That's typically going to be enough to protect you. Use proper hand hygiene and also cough and sneeze etiquette. The idea is to cough or sneeze in the crook of your arm instead of, coughing or sneezing in your hands or coughing and sneezing on someone else. So make sure to exercise those proper precautions. Avoiding contact with any bodily fluids, avoiding touching eyes, nose, and mouth, and then stay up to date on your company's COVID-19 policies, whatever those are. Next one. Okay, so then OSHA has also come out with some guidelines. And so what they did, they looked at some of the tasks associated with waste management work and put them into risk levels according to lower, medium, high, or very high. So next one. So what they consider to be lower risk tasks are things like handling municipal waste. They consider a lower risk task. Also handling recyclable materials, managing wastewater treatment systems. And then if you're doing maintenance tasks on those equipment that you use to do those tasks is also considered a low risk. Next one. Okay, so medium risk tasks include if you're working with handling waste from a healthcare facility that might care for people who have COVID-19, and also if you're performing maintenance tasks on the equipment that's used for medical waste. So that's a medium risk. Next one. So then they have high risk tasks and very high risk tasks. And really what they say is that most of the tasks that solid waste folks need to do and wastewater management folks do really doesn't fall into these high risk or very high risk categories. They really just fall into those lower or the medium risk areas. They do say you need to avoid doing tasks that might aerosolize. If you have materials that might have been exposed to someone who has COVID-19, you don't want to, like if you shred the material and it could possibly aerosolize that material, that could pose a risk and you might have to take some extra precautions. So what OSHA is saying for handling municipal waste is that, really, it's just handling it like you normally do. So you're wearing a mask, so that's one different thing. But other than that, just wearing your normal and following your normal safe work practices and using your normal personal protective equipment or PPE, like your puncture resistant gloves, face and eye protection, those kind of things can help prevent you from most of those kind of hazards. Next one. Also, if you're handling medical waste, again, kind of the same story here. Just wearing the same type of safety gear that you normally wear is typically going to be enough to protect you. So you have your normal PPE, puncture resistant gloves, face and eye protection is normally going to be good enough to protect the folks who work in those areas. Next. And then recycling. Again, it's kind of the same story here with recycling. When you have municipal waste and recycling, just following those typical engineering and administrative controls, your regular safe work practices and PPE, again, the gloves, the eye protection to protect you from any of those, those hazards that you might be exposed to. Okay, next one. Okay, and so for this portion, what we want to do is, we've had a lot of disasters in 2020. It was just an crazy year as far as disasters and disease outbreaks and hurricanes and other things. And so I want to turn it over to Simon Carlisle. Simon is the Senior Program Manager with Tetra Tech. And Simon, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your experience in dealing with COVID-19 and dealing with these disasters.
Sure. Thanks, Brian. One of the things that we found out, not necessarily the hard way, but in a quick way, was how to deal with monitoring debris operations in a COVID-19 environment. One of the first experiences we had with this was the Nashville tornado. That hit on March 3rd of last year. And if everybody recalls, that's about a week or 10 days really before shutdown started happening. So we were developing protocols really in real time on how to keep our folks safe. And because of that, we were able to immediately and safely respond to a bunch of other events this year, including the Iowa derecho that John had mentioned earlier, California wildfires, hurricanes in South Texas and across the Louisiana Gulf Coast, and in North Carolina. And believe it or not, actually in Connecticut, we have just been activated in the state of Connecticut for a hurricane that happened months ago to help oversee some of the haul out. So the protocols that we put in place have been great in keeping our staff safe and keeping operations going full steam ahead. I think you could probably advance, John.
Yep. Thanks, Simon.
There you go. One of the things we immediately did was come up with COVID-19 daily checklists and, as I mentioned, best practice protocols. So that incorporated all CDC guidance. We avoided large gatherings, practiced social distancing, clean and disinfect the surface constantly, and avoided physical contact. One of the challenges we have, if anybody has activated a monitoring service before, you understand that you have a lot of people in the morning and in the evening in the same location, checking in and checking out debris from debris operations. So we had to find facilities for meeting spaces and office spaces that were large enough to manage the volume of staff we had coming in and still be efficient. And we found that 6 square feet per anticipated person was our goal when we went to look for office space. So with that in mind, there wasn't a lot of guesswork. We kind of had our logistics department know exactly what to look for when we're starting off a new project. Go ahead, John. Our health and safety managers came up with a checklist or acknowledgement list that was gone over with every new employee we had starting on day one. And as you can see here on your screen, it's pretty simple to follow. Work begins. If you suspect you're symptomatic or are symptomatic, there's protocols in place for going home and staying home, quarantining, and then making sure that within 10 or 14 days, you've had either a negative test or you have not had symptoms for 3 days before returning to work. Any instance of suspected COVID or actual COVID has been reported from our field managers up through our senior management and our corporate health and safety managers, so we can kind of keep track of where we think we may have an issue. Go ahead, John. And as I mentioned a moment ago, having larger training facilities, consulting multiple training classes to allow for social distance. Whereas before we may have 40 people in the training class, now we're scheduling 2 training classes with 20 persons each. Staggering when our staff comes into work has been helpful. So we're not congregating at the same time. We're able to process folks in and out. The debris haulers we have worked with have been terrific about understanding that monitors may arrive in the field in small batches rather than all at once. We are trying where we can to make our offices one way in and one way out, so folks don't pass each other the same way, and wherever possible, doing outdoor or online training. And this is just a table of some of the changes we made, check in and check out. Again, prior to the risk of COVID-19, all field staff would come in together. Now we check them out staggered to maintain social distance. Our daily safety briefings, same thing. And now we would, rather than do it all at once, we'd have field supervisors take the folks under their direct report and do unique safety briefings with those groups. As a matter of fact, we've actually increased our number of field supervisors per staff. Typically, we're at about a 7 to 10 field staff to supervisor ratio. We've actually we're sticking a little closer to that 7, so that field supervisor is in contact with less people throughout the day. Field equipment is checked in and sanitized wherever possible, and so is paperwork. We isolate paperwork in bins for 3 days per CDC guidance and make sure that nobody's handling it. We try not to handle paperwork we try to handle paperwork with as few hands as possible. And to date, we've been pretty successful. We've had very few problems with our staff succumbing to COVID-19. And this just illustrates our quarantining of our paperwork. Years ago, everything was scanned and you have to we still do quite a bit of scanning, but now we're able to take pictures, and with scanning apps on our phone, we can take pictures and email relevant documents pretty efficiently and with as few hands on them as possible.
Simon, the one thing I was looking at and thinking about as far as your some of these tasks and of our team, and you look at a debris operation that can vary from a tornado that is very narrowly focused, like we saw in Nashville or out in the Chattanooga area, and then you look at a catastrophic event like Lake Charles, Louisiana, after Hurricane Laura, as well as Zeta, Beta, one of the Greek alphabet,
Yeah.
And, just looking at some of these challenges, in addition to, the regular challenges of no cell phone service or identifying, swooping into an area and not having places to stay, those sorts of things. I mean, can you tell like a war story?
Yeah, it's funny you should bring this up, and it's not something that typically you would think about unless we're in this scenario. One of the most unique challenges we had was we were actually successful because we've done this before and we had a plan in place. But one of the more unique challenges that we necessarily didn't anticipate was finding local staff. There was some incentive programs for folks and some increased programs to aid financially for folks that otherwise may have come to work for. So it was a challenge to convince folks that, here's a great opportunity to come be a local monitor in your local community versus, your unemployment or your incentive or your programs that you're entitled to are a little greater than what they used to be. And, it's going to be a challenge for me to talk you into walking away from that to come to work for us outside 7 days a week. So that was one of the unique challenges that we had that, again, we didn't necessarily anticipate it, but because we've done this enough times, we were able to overcome it.
Yeah, certainly some of the unemployment rate being what it was, you look at those numbers and then people applying for it. And then, like you said, whether it's a paycheck protection program or another program, a tenet of disaster debris operations, whether you're doing debris hauling, monitoring, as well as disposal, is accessing a local workforce to help quickly scale up that operation. And that wasn't available, or excuse me, the labor pool was certainly available. However, the incentive was off due to some of these federal programs, and which caused some challenges that, again, you just don't expect there.
Yeah, and you mentioned our larger programs. We're currently engaged with the state of California to oversee the remediation of a 9-county area in Northern California. This is related to the wildfires of 2020. It's in the same area as the Camp Fire, which most people have heard of, but it's same area, different fires. But that said, this, we can't stop the operations if somebody goes down. So we're in a situation now where our senior level management, we have some redundancies in place. So we have multiple folks on site that are capable of doing multiple different jobs. So if somebody were to go down, we have somebody next off the bench, so to speak, that can fill that role. And what we do is the folks that have similar responsibilities, we make sure that they're not near each other for more than 15 minutes a day. They don't live together, they don't work together, and they're not in the same office space. So we've got some redundancies in place for some of our larger projects so that if somebody were to be affected, and luckily it hasn't happened yet, that the machine can keep running, so to speak.
Awesome. Thank you, Simon. And with that, before we get into these solid waste reimbursement opportunities, is there any questions for Simon on the disaster debris operations and the impacts that COVID-19 has had on it? Aaron, do we have any now, or audience, please feel free to type it in the chat. We certainly want to encourage those to ask questions.
Yep, none at this moment. I'm sure they're furious.
Okay. All right. Well, if you think of any, please feel free to ask. Simon is a wealth of knowledge, and as well as Brian, and certainly something that we've got a lot of on-the-job experience with in responding to disasters, and have seen quite a bit in that way. So when it comes to COVID-19 reimbursement, we did the poll question at the beginning. A large majority of you have experience, knowledge, or working with the Coronavirus Relief Fund, which has been sponsored by the U.S. Treasury or administered by the U.S. Treasury, as well as the FEMA Public Assistance Program. Some really key differences here between the two programs, where from your start dates as well as end dates and continuing, those sorts of things. So we're going to dive into the various programs and really make sure, again, it seems like they're ever changing, ever evolving. I'll tell you a brief story before I get into the nuts and bolts of this, but one of the things that we did at Tetra Tech when working with communities all around the country is set up really more of a hub and spoke, a think tank, our coronavirus policy team, to answer all these questions, because in this situation, uniformity has been such a critical thing, because you have everybody impacted the same way. I mean, rural, urban, you're impacted in Florida or Texas or Connecticut. You're really all, I mean, yes, there's some nuance level differences, but when you hear, and we've had a chance to talk to some of the key leadership at FEMA and the administration there, and it's their intent. Again, this has been the intent, we feel, and I think it's been a good thing with the FEMA new delivery model, is that consistent delivery of the program, whether it's policy or whether it's process, implementing the consolidated resource center. So again, what we did in a telework environment is come together in a think tank type of policy group to take questions in, digest them, debate them, do the research, talk to folks, talk to federal officials, state folks, to try to bring together the best answer, understanding with always the caveat that the programs are going to be continuing to evolve. I mean, you look at, and we'll start with the Coronavirus Relief Fund, which had 3 necessary criteria, and that was that they were coronavirus tied expenditures, they weren't budgeted for, and they had to be funded between, or they had to be expenses from March 1st all the way through December 30th of 2021. With, I will say, a little caveat there is that as of December 27th, the president signed HR 133, which extended the Coronavirus Relief Fund program through December 31st, 2021. It makes me feel a little bit better. They're going to end it at the end of the year. It had bothered me for 10 months that it stopped one day shy of 12/31, but that's my that's some nuanced level stuff that's not important. But you know, you look at the documentation requirements, invoices, it's a higher level of detail. I mean, this program was really stood up overnight. When you look at the enabling legislation, the CARES Act, it required Treasury and the federal government to implement this program in 30 days. So you talk to communities who are out there who applied for the program, they sent an email or they sent the form with a signature, and boom, $400 million dropped in their account on April 17th of 2020. And so without much documentation, you know, you had local governments thinking, oh man, what can we use it for? Well, I mean, that's really the funding criteria, are those 3 things. But then as Treasury built out the program, as Treasury OIG integrated into that program, you saw the documentation requirements expand, and you saw a little bit more structure around the program. Then, of course, you had the tried and true FEMA Public Assistance Program, which the incident period for the entire nation, all 50 states, as well as the U.S. territories, were declared, and it's an ongoing disaster declaration. One of the questions we get all the time is, when is the incident period going to end? When is the Category B expenses going to end? And certainly we're not there yet. Well, I can tell you that I know that there's been some discussion. It's certainly something I think everybody in the nation, and I don't say that lightly, is looking at, because you have a national emergency that's set to expire at the end of January. And then one of the things that could happen is that the Category B expenses could be extended 90 days after that declaration of the national emergency is over. Conversely, it could be extended another 6 months, just like it was, or 3 months, just like it was back in October. It's certainly something we're looking at. In addition, the reimbursements of the program are different. You look at one of the things, I mean, I don't know why I didn't spend more time on this with CRF, or the Coronavirus Relief Fund, but it was upfront funding. FEMA, as I mentioned, communities who were eligible for the program received upfront funding, the cash in their bank accounts, and it was 100% federal assistance. You look at the FEMA Public Assistance Program, again, in very few cases did they provide expedited funding. but it has been more of a traditional reimbursement program, and that reimbursement program is at the 75%. Again, one of the things that is being highly speculated is a potential change in that cost share. I know from previous pieces of legislation that had been introduced prior to the last continuing resolution that had all the COVID bill tacked onto it. I know that at the legislative branch, they were looking at mandating a higher cost share, not only for the COVID program to 100%, but in addition, some of the language in the HEROES Act, I believe, included cost share language that moved the cost share up to 90% for all disasters in 2020. So those tornadoes or derechos or hurricanes that you heard about, that cost share would be increased as well. Hasn't happened yet, but what I've seen in the last 24, 72, however many hours, nothing surprises me these days. Again, funding criteria, funds only provided for the category B, as we've talked about in previous workshops, that public assistance funds everything from debris removal, which we've spent a lot of time on, all the way through emergency protective measures, as well as which is funded through the program, and permanent repairs. Documentation requirements are consistent with the program that it's always had, much more detailed than the Treasury, although it has varied. I would say it's been varied from here to here versus from here to here, which is what you see in the Treasury program. So what our approach when working with local governments and kind of talking to people in the industry is, whether you're approaching this from the Coronavirus Relief Fund or seeking FEMA public assistance, the documentation requirements, you should hold yourself to a different standard than what is being put forth. And that's not to say, anyone wants to create paperwork. We've just seen over the years, these programs evolve, just like the Treasury program with their FAQs. That was often a early Christmas present for me, is when the frequently asked questions, which had been a constantly evolving document, would be released, and you would see this. So again, the Coronavirus Relief Fund, administered by the Treasury under the Social Security Act, targeted at the state level, state of Texas, received, and through Texas Division of Emergency Management, administering those funds to a large portion of the state versus some of the direct recipients, the Fort Bend counties, the Montgomery counties, Tarrant, Hidalgo, Houston, City of Houston, Harris County, which received direct assistance everywhere. And again, I think that assistance went nationally, anywhere from $40 million all the way up to $1 billion for New York City. Again, you look at those three basic principles: unbudgeted, costs incurred after March 1st, tied to COVID-19, and you had to spend it again by December 31st. The rules being evolved and the programs being evolved is certainly something that we've seen a lot of. As I mentioned, the frequently asked questions has been something that has provided more guidance to what communities can claim. And you look at some examples of those claimed costs: personnel costs or personnel redeployment. Maybe you had personnel that went to solid waste staff that you repurposed, or library staff or community center staff who are now temperature screeners, or folks who are out there taking tests, substantially dedicated to COVID-19 activities. And really we saw this a lot for law enforcement personnel, public health personnel. We did see it for solid waste personnel as well. And that's one of those things that is certainly, each disaster, I feel each program has a bit of a, that one big deal, that one big issue. And this is one I can tell you from my perspective is the issue du jour of the Coronavirus Relief Fund, and that's the substantially dedicated to the COVID-19 activities, where that has been evolved. Many people, I know several folks in the industry who are out there providing consulting services, as well as local governments, have differing views of what substantially dedicated means and how much documentation is required. You look at the issues of hazard pay, which we've talked about, solid waste additional collection and disposal costs. Some of the communities out there have looked at what their traditional MSW costs are and then what they were under COVID-19 and claiming that delta there. So, again, if your tonnage is up 80,000 over that covered period, and you can really tie it back to the stay-at-home orders that were there, and you really have that strong tie back, that's what a lot of communities done. One of the things I've seen, and I think it's really relevant because a lot of people are still looking at where to spend or documenting what is out there. A lot of communities used an action plan type of approach where you had a challenge team in Houston, you had a working group with Harris County, in Philadelphia, you had the it was a steering committee, and you had a action plan that kind of broadly identified those areas that you wanted to fund, but you were able to drill down and you were able to tie back the expense to one of those guiding principles. And that's one of the things we've even approached it from position papers. Hey, you spent this on X. Well, let's memorialize it now as to why you spent that fund. And hey, you may need it, you may not, but it's better to have it now than in the future. Things like personal protective equipment and sick leave, we certainly have seen a lot of spend on that, and that's a no-brainer. But when you look at some of those stretch goals that some communities have, we highly encourage our communities to back it up with not only the data, the hard data, the timesheets or the receipts, but it's telling the story. And I think that goes between this as well as the FEMA program is the ability to tell the story. So the Coronavirus Relief Fund, again, I mentioned extension there. We're seeing a lot of folks really focused on being audit ready in a short period of time. Many communities are working with the Grant Solutions website, which was stood up very quickly, and being able to push data up there into the 6 cycles that I know will probably be adjusted because it currently ends at the end of October. And with the fund, I mean, you certainly have the new Treasury rental assistance program that was just announced, $25 billion that's funded by the Treasury for communities over 200,000. But when you look at the Coronavirus Relief Fund, we also expect supplemental FAQs to continue to come out. I think the last one came out on November 26th. So, my tummy rub, and I don't think that's the scalloped potatoes for lunch, will tell me that on about, this time or in the next week or so, they'll be issuing. One of the other things I encourage you to do for those of you who are engaged in the Coronavirus Relief Fund is make use of the hotline, make use of the email. If you do have questions, to email them. Certainly, we've seen a lot of communities successfully engage Treasury in talking to somebody over the phone, a live person, or getting emails responded to in a timely manner. So just, again, something to think about there as you look at this. You're looking at the FEMA program. Certainly something that has evolved again over time. You look at some key dates here. You look at that. I always say this. If you've worked with me long enough, or we've been in one of these classes together, disasters don't age well, and we certainly see a lot of those things that local governments did and our sub-grantees or sub-grantees did in the immediate aftermath during the lockdown. Some of them may not be eligible, or some of them have to be much more well-defined after September 15th, which again, and even prior before. So, these are some of the examples that are enumerated in the policy. One of the things that FEMA's done an incredible job with is putting information out on their website. You look at medical care, including vaccination programs. That came out on November 19th. So for those of you who want to find out more on how FEMA will be reimbursing the vaccination program, you've heard President-elect Biden talk about how FEMA is going to play a major role in the vaccination program. You know, we believe it's certainly through funding, purchase and distribution of food, EOC operations, non-congregate sheltering, mass casualty management, PPE. That one definitely is a lightning rod, because you look at this issue of increased operating costs. That's certainly something that, again, people on both sides of the aisle, or both sides of the spectrum, if you will, feel very strongly about, as to whether or not that should be an eligible expense. And then you look at some stockpiling as another expense. Again, you look at some of these other specific protective measures. These were ones that, again, as that disaster has evolved, as COVID has evolved, these are being tied to make sure that it is fundable if the work that's being performed is eligible as well. So you have a two-part litmus test or hurdle rate. And so you look at disinfection, barriers or plexiglass, transportation, labor equipment, those sorts of things that have to be not only characterized as being eligible here, but the work being done. So you look at disasters that will span both that and qualify them for this program. You look at documentation, really not much different than what's normally required. We certainly have some interim policies that are out there, timesheets, contracts for services, exigent period documentation. We certainly have seen a lot of that as well, in making sure that you are properly documented, if you will, for these different programs. So with that, I will pause. I know that's a lot to digest. We have about 30 minutes left, and we're going to be, again, spending a lot of time on FEMA and COVID and certainly the impacts and coronavirus relief fund. So with that, Erin, do we have any questions from the audience?
Again, not at this moment.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you, I mean, this one.
John, can you hear me?
Oh yeah, Harry.
Yeah, this is Harry. I sent you a note just to ask if you could split a little bit with the smaller cities that didn't get the direct funding on the CARES spending, and then the FEMA 75-25, and whether or not the Senate Bill 7 portion would be applicable to them on their local share.
I as far as Senate, as far as the local share, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's something that was discussed for about the first 6 months, and whether or not you could use coronavirus relief funds with to pay for the local share of the FEMA funds. And so, yes, they can use those, much like you've seen with HUD funds in the CDBG program, that you're able to match federal grants. It's in very, very few cases that you're able to match those federal grants. And so what the CARES Act would do is really take up that 25% cost share for those funds. So I don't know if Senate Bill 7 is involved at this time, but certainly the CARES Act, you have that ability to match the grants. Now, again, one thing I will say is, from an implementation perspective, it's still evolving, because we all know that to get through the CRC process and region and working with the state, it does take time. It's just like any other grant. They have FEMA has done some great things to expedite the paperwork. There's a new expedited, streamlined process that is being used now to push information through the CRC. Everything has gone virtual. That's one thing we did see after all the hurricanes and all of the disasters, is that your FEMA program delivery managers are all virtual. And so, that's again, I know a lot of folks are interested in what to expect in the next disaster. And I don't have the crystal ball here, but I can tell you just from a labor and a business model operation, I got to think that the folks at FEMA are really thinking hard about how do we keep this remote model going, because certainly costs associated with travel and hotels and the 50-week rule and things like that are potentially could go away through this program. So, that's one of the things I would say, taking away from this, not only this program, but future disaster programs, is how much is it going to be on site and how much is it going to be remote? I mean, certainly debris operations are going to be, you'd have to have those to continue to be on site, but certainly some of these other pieces of it, we certainly expect them to continue to move from a remote program delivery grant manager perspective. All right. With that, I am going to turn it back over to Simon for some of the recent changes in disaster debris and public assistance regulations here. Simon, I will, and again, before I turn it over to, again, please, if you do have questions, please feel free to write those in.
Thanks, John. I'm going to spend a couple minutes talking about some changes to the public assistance program and policy guide, which is available online. And there are many changes in the new guide, most of which can, believe it or not, be found on page 12. The guide itself does a really good job of describing what's new for the new policy. The latest version 4 is good for disasters that happen on or after June 1st of 2020. It reorganizes and simplifies language, and if anybody that has gone through FEMA reimbursement in the past understands that anything that reorganizes and simplifies the language is much appreciated. Some of the language previous to this was written in may and can, and this is a little bit more will and shall. It incorporates the entire program delivery process. So it's more of a turnkey document. It takes you through disaster to request for public assistance to close out, and focuses a little bit more on an outcome driven recovery model, meaning you as the applicant have a little more say in how you get from point A to point Z and what happens in between. One of the other changes not mentioned on the slide here is the changes that have been made to the incentive programs that were associated with previous pilot programs. That was the sliding scale that offered you an additional federal cost share for how quickly you picked up debris. Whatever was picked up in the first 30 days, you would get 85% federal cost share. Whatever was picked up from day 31 through 90 was 80% cost share. And then day 91 through 180 would be the traditional 75% cost share. That program has been eliminated, as has the incentive program for having a debris management plan, whereas you would get, if you had an approved debris management plan, you get an additional 2% on federal cost share increase for the first 90 days of operation. That said, it is still a very good idea to have a debris management plan. Just because FEMA is not incentivizing it anymore doesn't mean you should ignore the fact that that's a useful document. And then ownership of debris and selling the recycled debris and keeping the revenue generated from that sale has also been eliminated. That wasn't a program a lot of people took advantage of. We did have a couple clients that had ownership of the debris, tried to sell it to an end user, and they found out very quickly that a lot of the end users, they didn't have an agreement with an end user, so that when they tried to market their materials, they had no place to take it, or they did have an agreement with an end user, and that end user just couldn't process the debris and the quantities of which they were getting. So we'd had a situation with one client in particular where they had reduced debris. They were trying to take it to a waste energy facility, and they could only accept 2 truckloads a day, and it extended the project literally months beyond what it needed to be. But that's neither here nor there. That program has been eliminated as well. What is remaining, however, is the incentive or the allowance for straight time and overtime reimbursement for force account labor if they are working on debris related activities. John, you want to move on? some of a 15,000 foot overview of some of the changes. Again, it can all be found on page 12 of the document. This clarifies some of the standby time document for specifically staff conducting eligible sheltering, search and rescue, emergency care. One of the examples the document gives is if you have a bus driver evacuating some of your residents, and that driver has to sit and wait for either the bus to be loaded, unloaded, or traffic, or any situation where it would cause them to be standby, that's now eligible. So there's some good examples in there as well. It reduced the list of services eligible for temporary relocation and added some examples of eligible and ineligible support services. Some services eligible for relocation services would be election and polling locations, homeless and domestic violence shelters, and several others. And that can be found on page 130. And as I mentioned, this is readily available online, but certainly we will send Erin a link to this document if anybody would like it. We'll make sure she has that. Private property debris removal is always an issue following disaster. And this doesn't really change the process for that. You still have to make a written request to identify the specific properties or area where you'd like private property debris removal to occur. And then FEMA will initiate a review and survey the properties. But the change now is you can go ahead, and if you feel confident that you are going to qualify for reimbursement of private property debris removal, you don't have to wait for FEMA to approve it. The onus of the documentation and the paperwork and the due diligence is still going to be your responsibility. However, you don't have to wait for FEMA to start working. One other thing worth mentioning here, though, when it comes to private property and all debris removal, this new document actually does a really nice job of spelling out the new environmental regulations that are associated with things like ground disturbance. So there has been in the past things like stump removal. There was some questions about the process to get those removed and approved. The new document does a pretty good job of explaining that as well.
Hey, Simon, I know one of the things we've worked together on many different disasters, and you see different FEMA regions handling private property debris removal different ways. You talk about this allowing local governments who feel confident or comfortable with going ahead and starting. What would you recommend as that either that litmus test for a community, or what sort of activities would you recommend local governments engaging in prior to the full FEMA approval?
Well, actually, the new public assistance program policy guide does a pretty good job of explaining basically the checklist that you're going to want to go through to make yourself feel comfortable. So is the removal of debris from private property in a betterment to the community at large? Is it storm generated? Is there a public health determination that would allow for such a thing? So the document itself actually does a pretty good job of crosswalking you through what is going to make private property debris removal eligible.
Thanks, Simon.
Sure. One of the new changes that a lot of communities are excited about, we have, as I mentioned earlier, we've responded to a couple storms on not only the Louisiana, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama Gulf Coast, but there was Hurricane Isaias earlier this year, and we had some clients in the Carolinas that activate us, and this new policy helped them out. It's debris removal on roads that have unrestricted access. So these would potentially be private roads, but there is no gate, there is no guard shack, and there is no clear ownership. That is now an eligible expenditure. If the public has full access to these roads, and it would be considered something that the public would be heavily traveled, you can now pick up debris from these roads. Certainly, its best practice would still be to segregate the debris quantities in those locations and not commingle the data with debris that's coming off public rights of way, but that is an eligible reimbursable expense now. Also, in the new policy guide is some language that explains private nonprofits or adds eligible private nonprofits. Those are animal control facilities, center-based childcare, and center-based childcare is something that's structured like childcare out of a church, not necessarily out of a private residence, even though that resident may be licensed as a daycare center, and food banks as well. And then some added language on closeout documentation and requirements for all documents to be submitted within 90 days of work completion, regardless of the status of the project. The guide also, John, can you just go back for just a second? The guide also, one of the major changes is large-scale permanent projects. And as I mentioned early out of the document, page 12, it kind of walks you through what some of the changes are for reimbursement for those type projects.
I think this closeout one, though, is very important for folks to understand and be aware of for those future disasters, because so much attention is being paid to close out. Certainly is good to know.
And then along with the Public Assistance Program Policy Guide is the issuance of the Interim Public Assistance Monitoring Guide, which was released in July. It was open for public comment through September 17th. At this point, no comments are accepted. You can, down at the bottom of the page there, get a link to that document. And again, we'll make sure Aaron has that as well for distribution. Go ahead. As anybody that's been through this before understands that monitoring is a crucial component of your reimbursement. The monitor's responsibility is to document the who, what, when, where, why, and how much debris was removed. And this document goes over roles and responsibilities of not only the monitor, but state and local governments and FEMA as well. John, did we lose? Oh, there we go. Again, part of the updated guide, FEMA recommends the applicant clearly outlines their debris monitoring requirements in their debris management plan. As I mentioned before, the incentive program for having a debris management plan no longer exists, but it is still a very good idea to have that repository in place so that any new staff or any staff that haven't been through a recovery mission in a while can easily pick it off the shelf, do a quick flip through and understand what the general goals, guidelines, and procedures are for debris removal in your community. As with anything else, it does the new policy, the new monitoring guide, and the public assistance program guide talks about the importance of procurement and following not only state but local procurement guidance when you go out for not only your debris monitoring but your debris hauling contracts. And again, failure to properly monitor debris removal operations may jeopardize public assistance funding. So, in essence, it's if it's not documented, it didn't happen, and that's the job of not only a monitoring firm but your force account staff as well. On a small scale event, you may be able to handle it internally, but the requirements for documentation are still the same. And there, that backs up my, this is a much nicer picture than just looking at me talk, but that backs up my point. Yeah, force account labor contracts can be used for monitoring debris operations, but either way, the onus of the documentation is still the same. Some eligible monitoring expenses, labor and material costs associated with field supervisors, loading and tower site monitors, and completing documentation for public assistance funding. This guide actually does a pretty good job of providing job descriptions of what the roles and responsibilities are for supervisors, monitoring, and data manager. At the end of, oops, sorry, go back just, sorry
about that.
Yeah, data completion of load tickets and field debris monitoring. I know for Tetra Tech standpoint, and quite frankly, for most other monitoring firms in the industry, we're not completely ticketless, but we are electronic. So the compilation of load tickets is something that typically maybe 10 or 12 years ago used to take 90 days at the end of a project. But now, as everybody knows, in the advent of an ADMS system, it's a much cleaner and much easier process, but it still has to be done. You still have to have tickets and records in order and turned over to FEMA for reimbursement. Training of debris monitors, and again, the use of an electronic load system, load ticketing system are all eligible expenses that's spelled out in the monitoring guide. Again, load site monitors, as I mentioned, the document does a great job of explaining the roles and responsibilities of all positions, including state and local and federal guidance. But these are the folks that are on the street performing, collecting debris of where, collecting information, I should say, of where debris has been collected, what type of debris, was it in an eligible location, what the road maintenance responsibility, was it the result of a disaster. It's really the first line of documentation for us in the field. tower monitors or disposal monitors, do a quality control check of the information that is collected in the field, and they measure and document the quantities of debris coming into a disposal site. Our system works where, as I mentioned, it's all electronic, but they are we do have a control ticket that comes with the driver to the disposal site that is scanned, and all the information is downloaded from the collection site. And then once we close out the load, we're able to print out a hard copy of the ticket. Going back to one of the things I mentioned earlier in the previous section, one of the changes we've made during COVID-19, which we've always had the ability to do, but more people are taking us up on the option now, is rather than get a ticket in hand for every load they dump, we're able to give them an export or give them full transparency into our data system so they can export it themselves, all the tickets that have been collected during the day with the collection and disposal information. So, some haulers like the hard copy ticket in their hands. Others are fine with an electronic submittal. And again, they have full transparency into that process. So no paperwork really ever has to exchange hands if both parties agree. And it's just another measure we take to protect against COVID-19. Field supervisors, as I mentioned earlier, we're typically at about a 10-to-1 ratio. Due to COVID-19, we've dropped down to about a 7-to-1 ratio so that field supervisor doesn't see or doesn't interact with as many people during the day. But their job is to schedule and deploy monitors under their purview, oversee and assure quality assurance of the paperwork or the records that are being generated by their monitors, review the logs, and review pictures nightly. So our monitors come into the field. If they have been monitoring leaners and hangers, obviously there's a component, a requirement to collect measurement and eligibility pictures. And before their monitors leave every evening, we go through those pictures, compare them to the logs and the tickets that were written, so we can do daily reconciliations of those. And if you are one of the communities that have activated us here in the last couple of years, I think you've noticed that it's gone from getting a daily report maybe at 3 a.m. the day after operations to now we're usually getting reports out by about 9:30 in the evening. So it's really sped up our reporting and our closeout time. Having supervisors do real-time QA checks of the information that's coming in every day. And debris monitoring, the guide spells out reasonable level of effort. So one loading monitor at each loading site per loading device. In some areas where the trucks are a little more compacted, FEMA will now allow one monitor for 3 or 4 loading devices, providing that they can all be watched and seen relatively regularly. When I say regularly, I mean within every couple minutes that monitor has the ability to check on somebody. Tower monitors, one tower monitor at each DMS. Health and safety dictates that we typically have 2, one in the tower and one on the ground, especially if the debris management site is in a remote location. You may also have an exit tower as well with a monitor that ensures that the trucks are empty when they're leaving the disposal site. And again, I mentioned this earlier, contracting for debris removal, monitoring, and debris removal hauling. It has to be a competitive process and meet federal guidelines. There are some stipulations for emergency procurement if you don't have a monitoring firm in place. And again, you just have to follow your local and federal guidelines for that. Whenever you do select a debris hauler or debris monitor, or any services for that matter, make sure, and the new public systems monitoring guide does a nice job of spelling that out, make sure you're keeping the records of who submitted on your solicitation and how you evaluated that, and make sure you follow your evaluation criteria when you're selecting a firm. Again, this goes into some of the documentation requirements, payroll records of full-time and temporary employees working on debris removal. This is if you decide to use force account labor to do your debris monitoring. Records of applicant-owned equipment used in debris removal operations. There is a FEMA cost code guide that will reimburse for the cost of the use of your own equipment. And then, of course, if you have to rent any equipment, make sure you're keeping those invoices as well. I wouldn't necessarily buy new equipment following a disaster. You might have some trouble getting that reimbursed, but certainly the rental of equipment to supplement your force account equipment or your assets is certainly allowable. And documentation permitting to disposal sites. Make sure that, and the new guide does a great job of walking you through what's going to be required to submit to FEMA as far as DEQ permits, any solid waste permit number you have, invoice for disposal and tipping fees, quantity of debris that's disposed, and the documentation of the location of debris, not only collection, but reduction and final disposal. This graphic existed in the old debris guidance documents or monitoring documents. They've just updated a little bit. And this is really part of and parcel to load calls at the disposal site. We use this graphic when we train our monitors, as well as about 40 other graphics. But one of the things that's not illustrated in this graphic is what to do if you have a debris hauling vessel that doesn't have a tailgate on it. And that's something that the new guide spells out pretty well. It's a 15% deduction off the capacity of the truck. So just simple math, if you have a 100-yard truck that doesn't have a tailgate, you're now making a load call on an 85-yard truck. So that's clear now in the monitoring guide, and the guide does a good job of explaining that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Simon. With the last couple of minutes, we want to wrap things up on talking about a couple of other changes, supplementing the debris and the FEMA public assistance. That's something to watch out for, which is the disaster grant closeout procedures, something that there were comment period back at the beginning of December, something that you can research or you can look on your own in case you're interested. We talked about closeout being the hot button topic. With the number of disasters out there, there has been such a increased scrutiny and focus on disaster closeout, something to definitely look for in that next disaster. Finally, we want to talk about BRIC. It's being, again, this is kind of an oh, by the way here, but the BRIC, Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities, is that new program. In case any one of you hasn't done this, I encourage you to sign on to the FEMA Mitigation Minute. It's email comes out once a month or so. Mitigation truly does interest me quite a bit. It's got some information on the BRIC program, which is replacing the pre-disaster mitigation and gives communities a great opportunity to fund mitigation programs. And so what I'm going to do with the last minute, the FEMA did open the period here in the state of Texas. The application period was due at the beginning of December, and the pre-award selection was noticed as upcoming in 2021. But it's not too early to start thinking about 2021 and what might be a good program for your community. And so therefore, I just want to leave you with, again, thank you so much for attending. We had a record-setting webinar. And with that, I want to turn it over to Aaron Livingston to talk about kind of next steps and where we can go from here.
Okay, thank you so much, John, and thank you to all of our other speakers. That was great, a lot of fabulous information, and some people did put that in the comments to me, so thank you very much to all of y'all. So I will be sending out an email. It will have a lot of, I tried to write down everything that was promised to you during this workshop from all the speakers. So I've got my list. So I will be sending out an email with all of the information, links to those things, those documents. We will also be including a link to our survey. It's an evaluation about the workshop. It has been posted in the chat if you want to go ahead and take that survey right now. So we would love for you to do that. It's really quick. I don't know how many questions, about 7 maybe, but they're really quick questions. So we would love it if you could fill out that evaluation for us. But I will also be sending that out in the follow-up email. And I will be doing that as soon as I can, as soon as I get everything that was promised to you. So, and that's all I have. But thank you everybody so much for joining us today. And I hope you enjoyed it.
All right. Thanks everybody. Bye-bye.